Okay, you ready? Hereby, I open this academic ceremony in which Sammy Wals will defend the academic thesis, Moving Stories, the Dynamics of Visual Storytelling. May I invite you to present the summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis. The floor is yours.
Okay. Well, dear pro-rector, dear members of the opposition, dear family members and friends, in the next 15 minutes I'll give you an overview of what I've been working on for the past 4 to 5 years. So I won't be able to provide all the details, but I can give you a short summary of it. All right. So what is it about? So, well, you all have personal experiences. If you're reading a good novel or you're watching a movie, that you're drawn into the world of a story. So that's the central concept in this dissertation, known as narrative transportation. So it describes how people are mentally immersed in this fictional world. So importantly, stories are not just entertaining, but they're also persuasive. So you can see that the line between fiction and facts can become blurred with stories. Some even argue that stories are the basis of human culture, so that we're described as homo narrans, or storytelling men, rather than homo economicus, so rational agents. So we also make decisions based on narratives. So because narratives are very influential, they're also increasingly used in marketing. And that's also why we're studying them, so how they impact human behavior. So while the topic of narratives has been studied for a long time, recently things have changed, right? So in the past, stories used to be mostly verbal, so in the form of speeches or books. But nowadays, video content is a very dominant form of communication, right? So both on television, but also on modern social media platforms like YouTube, TikTok, or Instagram, that we have a lot of this visual content. So as McLuhan, the communication theorist, famously said, so the medium is the message. So the fact that we're exposed to these stories in the form of video content has a number of important implications. And also for academic research, we need to update the theories that we have to be applicable to this context of video content. And that's why my dissertation is also about visual storytelling rather than storytelling in other forms. And then we're investigating how videos impact consumers and what the different factors of videos are that make it more or less effective. So in the existing literature, there are a number of gaps or limitations that we're solving. So first of all, there's a lot of different fields working on this topic of narrative, so it's very multidisciplinary. So there's stuff from literature, film studies, and more recently also computer vision. But all of these fields are very separated, so they're fragmented. And that's an issue because we could be missing out on important methods or insights that we're not using, right, in marketing. So related to that, it's more methodological, but there have been quite some developments in other fields, such as computer vision that I said earlier, to analyze videos, and also neuromarketing to measure viewer responses, so biological signals while you're experiencing these stories. But those haven't really been integrated yet into marketing research or combined to the full extent that they could be, right? So they have a lot of potential. And finally, what I said earlier, so the dominant model of how transportation works as a psychological concept, that's mostly based on studying reading experiences. So that model of how that works might not be appropriate for this type of content. So overall, there's a need to update our models and to use new methods and to develop a new theory as well for how transportation works, specifically for video content. So what did we do? So our goal was to solve these gaps or these challenges in the existing literature. And that's what we did. So across 3 different chapters, we filled these gaps. So in the first chapter, we start with a broad literature review. So we integrate the literature across different domains. And we also highlight what are these new methods from other fields that we could be using, right? So this chapter laid the foundation for the other 2. So we specified a research agenda that highlighted what are the research gaps and how could you use these methods to study storytelling scientifically, right? In chapter 2, we applied these new methods, and then we studied how our attention changes over time during the video viewing, using eye tracking methods and also computer vision to see how the different features of the video impact this attention. And finally, in chapter 3, we make a new model. We develop a new model explaining how transportation works, specifically for visual storytelling. All right. So starting with chapter 1, we have this broad literature review. So we did a review across different domains. And in order to do that, we used quantitative methods. So for the experts in the audience, it's co-citation analysis and topic modeling. And that allows us to analyze large amounts of literature, so more literature than you could read altogether. And our research question was, well, what are the dominant theories, what are the research gaps, and what are these promising new methods that we're talking about that we're not using. So you can see a little overview here. So we analyzed a lot of literature from different fields, and we use these quantitative methods to map out what are the main topics and what are people studying, how well are they integrated. And you can see that these keywords, that they cover different types of topics. But in a nutshell, we found that the most theories are based on studies on literature, so how people read different stories, even though video is more important. And then we also found that these newer technical fields like computer vision or neuromarketing are not really connected to the storytelling literature in a quantitative way, so using co-citation analysis. So based on that analysis, we developed a future research agenda, and then we were combining the strengths of these different fields together, and then we're using what are the advantages of each of these elements and to study storytelling. So in particular, computer vision, which you can use to analyze video content quantitatively. So with 30 frames per second, you can analyze each frame, and then you have a lot of data compared to doing experiments with 2 different types of videos. And also neuromarketing methods, so then you can analyze the viewer responses and you can see how people are responding over time. And putting that together, you can then analyze how are people responding and how is the content changing and how do these factors affect each other, right? Which is a lot more detailed than other approaches that are used. So in chapter 2, that's what we do. So we apply this research agenda, this idea that you could use methods like that. And then we combine these methods to study attention, so how it changes second by second or even frame by frame at 30 frames per second. And then we asked, well, how does our attention fluctuate during a video viewing of about 30 seconds? And how does that depend on the factors of the video? So in particular, the cuts of the video, when it changes to a new scene, and also how complicated the video is. So how many elements are in the scene, for example. So as I said, we used eye tracking to measure attention, and then computer vision to analyze these factors of the video. So I'll give you a little example. So this is an animated piece, one of the videos in our experiment. And then with the heat map, you can see where people are looking at. So you can see that the attention changes very quickly over time. So even within a couple seconds, there's a lot of variation. And people can't really report accurately on this if you would ask them after the viewing what they looked at each split second of this whole experience, right? So the novelty of that approach is that you get a lot more detail over time when the attention is high or low, or how it changes. So most studies look at averages for over the entire video, and then with this you can see what is happening within the videos. So that helps us to understand how the attention is changing and what the impact is. Okay, so if we can measure attention, then we want to know, well, can we explain why it's high or low at particular points in the video? So here we're looking at the changes over time. So here you can see on the bottom, you can see it over 30 seconds, so the attention being high or low. And then we combine that with these features of the video content. So these vertical bars are the cuts in the video when it changes from one scene to the next, and the colors are the visual complexity of it. So in the blue parts it's relatively simple, and in the red parts it's more complicated. And then we looked at, do those things relate to each other? So using time series analysis, we showed that there's a dynamic impact. So after a cut, there's an increase in attentional focus, and also during simpler scenes, the attention is also higher than during complicated scenes. So in a nutshell, the conclusion of this analysis is that keep it short and simple. So short scenes and simple visuals work better to maintain this attentional focus than long scenes and more complicated visuals. So using these methods, we investigated how we can optimize this attentional focus of viewers for video messages, right? Okay, so in the third chapter, so the last chapter of the dissertation, we develop a new skill to measure, well, how this transportation works specifically for video content instead of reading, right? Reading a novel. So with that, we're challenging this dominant transportation imagery model that I'll explain in a moment, that was developed for reading experiences by Green and Brock. So that's the main theory. And then we're basically arguing that, well, if you're reading a book or you're watching a movie from the same story, then it's a fundamentally different experience. So the transportation imagery model has these 4 factors about how transportation works. And then we're saying in particular the mental imagery dimension of that is kind of a problem. So if you're reading a book, then how they originally conceptualize mental imagery is that you're reading a book and then you're visualizing in your mind what does the actor look like, or what does this scene look like. But if you're watching a movie, you're not really doing that anymore. So instead of that, you're processing all of this audio-visual information that's already sent to you. So then, we would ask, well, does mental imagery still happen or not? Is it different? So we develop new factors that explain this experience of this external stimulation and so on. So we challenge this transportation imagery model and develop another one. Okay, so skipping a lot of the methodological details in how we did that exactly. In the end, we came to the 5-factor model, you could say, of visual storytelling. So we retain the 3 core elements of the transportation imagery model. So we still have transportation, or being kind of immersed in this fictional world. Emotional connection, so having empathy for the characters, which is generalizable across reading and video, right? And also interpretation, so the understanding of what the story is about. With interpretation, we did add some items about semiotics, so the interpretation of the visual. So if there's symbolism or things are shown rather than said, then there's also a different kind of interpretation going on. But more importantly, the mental imagery dimension does not show up as a factor anymore, so in our analysis. So we don't have a factor for mental imagery anymore, but instead of that, we have a factor for multimodality, so the experience of rich audiovisual stimulation and also the combination of sounds and visuals. And finally, we have a separate factor for the aesthetics of it. So the experience of, from beautiful imagery, right, and visual style of it. Okay. So finally, we tested the skill. So we applied it to predict opening weekend ticket sales for movies in the United States. So we showed people movie trailers, and then we asked them to rate their experiences on this scale, and then we used that to predict the first weekend how many tickets are sold for the movies. So we basically show that it works, and we can predict the revenue, so in millions of dollars on the y-axis. And then we show that 1 point increase on our scale relates to $5 million increase in ticket sales for the movie. So the better the movie trailer scores on the scale, the better the more people go to the movies. Okay, so in conclusion, the dissertation has 3 main contributions. So first of all, we bridge a lot of literature from different fields, so including also film studies, linguistics, computer vision, neuroscience. So we combine a lot of different things together. And related to that, we have this novel analytical approach that also combines a lot of innovative methods from different fields to study audiovisual storytelling. And third, more theoretically, we then challenge this transportation imagery model, and we develop a new one that I showed at the end. So instead of mental imagery, we have these new factors of visual storytelling about using sounds and visuals and also the different aesthetics of it. So overall, my dissertation shows that visual storytelling is a very rich and dynamic process, so things are happening over time. And we show this new analytical approach using computer vision and neuromarketing that's generalizable and that can be flexibly used with different features of videos and also different viewer responses. And our 5-factor scale that define these new factors that can also be studied. So what are the aesthetics, or how can you use sounds and visuals? So overall, this dissertation helps us to further investigate and understand visual storytelling and provides new methods that you can use in your own research as well, or future research. Okay, so thank you for your attention, and then I'll give the word back to the...
Thank you for your presentation. The opposition will be opened by Professor Dr. Dominique Maher, who is actually, you can't see it, but he's on the screen there. And, he was the chair of the assessment committee and is a professor in digital innovation and marketing at this university. The floor goes to Professor Maher.
Thank you very much, and thank you, dear candidate. Sorry that I cannot be there in person, but I enjoyed reading your thesis or dissertation. Now I'm actually looking forward also to actually ask you some questions which relate to something that we met last week. I'm going to relate it to, of course, extended reality, the conference that we both joined. But first of all, congratulations to you and all your supervisors and your supervisory team for an excellent piece. But also, I think what is really important, it gave you already a job in academia, and I know that you are enjoying also your time in Aachen. So I'm going to relate it to the topic of the conference where we both attended. So while I really like your work, and I think you, as you mentioned also, you add more sensory elements, you provide more richness, as you say. At the same time, I think it can be even a step further. And think about extended reality, think about virtual reality, augmented reality in particular. So I would like to know, if we make it more rich, that means not only having 2-dimensional storytelling, but actually it's a 3-dimensional, maybe story self-creating also. Because if you are in an extended reality space, you actually immerse into a context. You're actually taking actively part, you create the story almost yourself. So I believe, or I could imagine at least, that this changes the mechanism of narrative transportation. Also, maybe you can also reflect already how and which one maybe of these mechanisms were amplified or challenged, what you found in your study in this, due to this immersive environment. So that's the first part of my question. And the second part refers to, and it's quite related, which refers to what you have been mentioning in chapter 3 also. It's about the multisensory experience or the multisensory storytelling. You rightfully added more element of the visual and of the hearing. I mean, so auditory and visual elements. But I would be also interesting, why not making it a truly multisensory experience and then taking it one step further, virtually or not, and adding haptics, smell, etc. As you know, that some companies also have been playing around with actually giving you a smell when you watch a particular website, a particular movie. So yeah, this extension of richness in terms of active as well as additional sensory experiences, I think that would be for me interesting to hear your reflection about.
Well, highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. Can you hear me correctly? Or?
I can hear you very well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for your question. I also find it very interesting. So we were both at the XRM conference last week about virtual reality. So indeed, I think that's an interesting part of where storytelling might be going in the future, right? So we, for this dissertation, we focused on videos because at the moment that's arguably the most dominant form of communication. So virtual reality and augmented reality are growing as media, but they're not as widespread yet as video. So that's why we did video instead of augmented reality or virtual reality. But I agree that that's very interesting. So I would, in terms of the factors that would be different, we didn't collect data on that, so I can't give you really a conclusive answer on that, but that would be something for future research. But I would expect that possibly the emotional connection factor could be less important, as you're not necessarily empathizing with another person if you're interacting with the story yourself, as a so to say. So then you're not imagining how it is for the main character, but then if you are the main character yourself, then I suppose that would be different. And I think also the interactive elements would be very interesting, so that there's more agency involved. So there was some work on P responses, so participatory responses in video, but it's that people jump out if they're scared in a scary movie, for instance, like they're involved in it. But I would say reading and video viewing is much more of a passive experience than gaming or virtual reality in general. So I think there would also be new factors that are important about goal-directed behavior or interaction with different aspects of it. And then for your other question, it's also definitely interesting about integrating smells and touch, for example, in storytelling. So I mean that can be done in museums, for example. In some cases they use that, or in movie theaters where they make the chairs vibrate if there's something exciting going on. So I think that's definitely interesting. But for most cases with general video content, we didn't include that because that's not available in most cases yet. That answers your question.
Thank you. My suggestion is that we move on to the next member of the committee, which is Professor Dr. Willemijn van Dolen, who was also a member of the assessment committee and who is a professor in marketing at the University of Amsterdam.
Thank you very much. Dear candidate, you call your dissertation Moving Stories, and I think at least I've been moved by your dissertation. I think it's a very rigorous exploration of how visual narratives influence perception and behavior. I thought it was exceptionally insightful, so congratulations on your work and also to your supervisors. I think you would not be surprised that my question is about Chapter 2, because that's where our research both focuses on, and you also refer to it. So you call it short and simple, and you conclude that simpler visuals enhance attentional synchrony in videos, recommended that movie directors adopt these editing principles. This perspective suggests that for dynamic content, simplicity in visuals is indeed key for guiding viewer attention. However, in the article that we published, simplicity is not key, which your dissertation also refers to. We posit a more nuanced view of static social media images and consumer liking. I found that simplicity is not always key. Revealing an inverted U-shaped relationship for feature complexity, where mid-levels are optimal, and a U-shaped relationship for design complexity, where either low or high complexity can be preferred. This suggests that for images, some degree of complexity can be beneficial or even optimal for consumer liking. So how do you reconcile the seemingly divergent findings regarding visual complexity? That's my first question. And my second question is that in our work, we distinguish between feature complexity, so pixel level variation, and design complexity, so structure design level variation, arguing that multidimensional approach provides a more nuanced view and offers greater managerial control. In your work, visual complexity measure is based on high-level salience map, integrating various visual features into a single metric. Could applying the more granular, distinct measures of feature complexity and design complexity, as opposed to your single salience-based metric, reveal a more nuanced understanding of the dynamic impact on attentional synchrony or other video outcomes?
Well, highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. So indeed, I've read the paper, and we kind of contrast our paper against the one from you with Gijs Overgoor. So for your first question about the inverted U shape, so I do realize that in some cases, if the images are too simple, it would also be uninteresting. Right, so I don't think it's in all cases necessarily a linear one. So in our study we also tested for a inverted U shape, but we didn't find that in our case. And I put that in the discussion section, that I think there are important differences between what the effect of complexity is for video content versus what it is for still images. In terms of the outcome measures. So I think for engagement with still images, it's more interesting if people can look around the image and observe different areas, and that's then how we would define engagement in terms of attention for still images, so the visual exploration of these different parts of the image. But then for video we use this synchronization, so that people are following along a certain narrative, and I think in that case for video it would be difficult to follow if there are different elements at the same time, because people can't they can't follow different areas at the same time. There's a time element to it that is not present in still images, which I think is where the difference comes from. And it could be the case that, I'm kind of speculating there, but that I think video is inherently more complex, that there's already audio as well, and then a time element involved. So that if there's an inverted U shape, that the optimal level would be lower for video than it would be for still images in terms of visual complexity. And then for your other question about how we define visual complexity, so I understand there's this distinction being made in the literature about design complexity and feature complexity. That was also in the Peter's article about visual complexity. Yeah. So yeah, I would also expect a question on that. But yeah, we purposefully did not use that. So there's an argument in the methods section about why we defined it differently. So our approach is more based on this kind of biological understanding of how attention is being controlled, so to say. So that's with these saliency maps. And then, according to the theory that we use down in the brain, so to say, there's no distinction between feature complexity or design complexity. But then there are different visual areas for contrast and so on. But in our case, that was a more parsimonious way of defining complexity that links with how attention works in the brain, according to the theories from Etienne Koch, for example. But I agree that you could further break that up into different kinds of complexity, and then you could argue that some are more positive than others, or that there's some interaction. But yeah, that was not how we ended up defining the concept. Yeah.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Professor Dr. Jos Lemming, who is a professor in marketing and service innovation at this university. The floor goes to Professor Lemming.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Congratulations, Sammy, with your dissertation. I was really impressed by all the tools and also the clarity of your texts and your recommendations. So I'm very impressed. On behalf of Rachel Powell, who unfortunately could not be here, and she was member of the committee, I would like to ask a very general question first, before I will pose my own question. And this is about the training data and the biases in training data when using AI algorithms to estimate your results. Could you in general answer the question how these biases could affect the results, and how would you take them into account? This is a very general question about the training algorithms in AI.
Yeah, so is that in thank you for your highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. But does that comment relate to, could you clarify which?
I think it's one of the results, or one of the tools that you're using that make use of AI.
Yeah, so I mean in chapter 3 we're using AI for a rather like a minor task than to classify these items and then seeing if they're easily matched to the definitions that we have as kind of a replacement for this labor-intensive human process of going through. At some point we had over 500 items, and then to classify which ones were easily understandable and which weren't. That's very labor-intensive. So in terms of bias, that's an important point, of course. I think, again, so these methods are still very new and experimental, so I wouldn't be able to give a definitive answer on that, but I can think about how that would impact the findings. So I would imagine that the bias there is more westernized, so that you would get it's more applicable to Western text. So we're using English for our items. So I think in that case it was matched appropriately in terms of the language at least. But another reviewer also brought that up, that there could be cultural bias in our understanding of it, so that we're not including, for example, data on more collectivist cultures. So, for example, in China, it could be the case that the experience of narratives or storytelling is more based on group level phenomena, that people are doing it together versus alone. So that could be an important cultural difference that I also noted in the limitations. But that's not something that we have the data on to say it is like that or one way or the other, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. Then to my own question, and this is about all the nice tools that you're using, state-of-the-art, eye tracking, frame-based information or data from frames, and then analyze it in a very detailed manner. I would like to take you back 1 year after you were born. That's 1997, yes, yes. And there was an article of Baumgartner, Sujan, and Paget. Baumgartner you're referring to a lot, but this is Baumgartner, Sujan, Paget. And they were analyzing ads, so advertisements, and they did not use eye movement tracking or frame pixel measuring, but they used very simple techniques based on self-reports. So self-reports. So what they actually did is they showed an ad to the test persons, and then they asked them second by second to self-report on the emotion. So how emotional am I in the beginning, in the middle, at the end? And then there was a continuous scale actually about emotion. So one of the results they presented was that the emotions were not really directly lived, right? But it was also based on a couple of seconds before the emotion, up to 20 seconds. So this means that the measurements you do also with eye tracking probably is not only based on the moment itself or with a little lag, but also based on 10, 20 seconds before that particular experience. So that is one observation, and can we learn from this, or how did you incorporate that or not, or was it not necessary? It's only emotions, so that's one. The second is, at the end, you were interested in the liking and the recognition, right? So you're trying to analyze the ad or the video, and you're interested in liking and recognition. So what Baumgartner and friends also concluded is that you could integrate all these moments into one response, and you can do that in different ways. You couldn't, and one of the theories says, well, you should do it in the beginning, the starting emotion is determining, or the end emotion is determining, the change in emotions is determining for the end result, but also, for instance, peak to end. So if there is a very limited peak to end, then probably there is a relationship with less liking and less recognition. So there are all sorts of information you can conclude from, all sorts of conclusions you can draw from the research of Baumgartner. Is there these things that I mentioned now to you? Is that recognizable? Did you test that? Is that to be taken into account in the future, or did you take that into account? I'm just puzzled about what is the effect on your research and how can you use it?
Yeah. So, highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. So, indeed, I think this research is very useful. So, we also positioned our research as kind of an extension of that. So, we're not rejecting that research at all. So, I think some papers in neuromarketing are a bit exaggerated, that they say, well, we should only use neuromarketing methods and not self-report anymore, or they are totally contradictory to each other. But that's not what we found. So in general, they're quite aligned in terms of the results that they provide. So if someone self-reports to be very happy, then that would also show up in facial expressions and so on. So they would be consistent with each other. So I agree that, for example, moment-to-moment analysis are an interesting way of getting into these like temporal dynamics, so how it changes over time, which I think is an important area also for visual storytelling. At some point, I do think that there's a limitation there in terms of the resolution of the so you can't really ask someone to judge their emotion per like every half of a second or so. So there would be like an irregular interval, or you could do it per scene, for example, or per chapter of a book, for example, in these longer forms. So I think it would still be a useful analysis.
So sorry to interrupt, but these were continuous measurements, right? So you ask someone to continuously really reveal the emotions as far as you are experiencing it.
Yeah.
So there is a lag, of course, for what you see and how the emotions are measured, and the time the emotions are measured. But it's a continuous scale. So it's not suffering from limited information, right?
Yeah. So I mean, to be honest, I'm not fully clear on all the details of that particular study, but. So if I understand correctly, they're using a dial to report this. Yeah. So I mean, I think it's still useful, and I think it's a valid approach. I think what we're doing is just adding on top of that as a complementary rather than a complete replacement. So I think it does provide new information. So for example, about attention, what we did is not. So you could on a dial you could. Indicate a high or low level of attention, for example, or interest, but the level of detail with the eye tracking would be difficult to replicate with this self-report method. But I think they're just different tools that are suited for different purposes as well. So in the final chapter, we're also developing our own self-report skills. So we're not rejecting self-report by any means. So. I think the difference would be that it depends on the research question, what method ultimately is the most suitable. So in the final part where we're talking about empathy or these like higher level concepts about your experience in general, then I think self-report is more appropriate than neuromarketing methods in general. But if we're more interested in these like sub-second level changes and these quick responses, then I think neuromarketing has an advantage there if you're looking at it in a few seconds. If there's time, or
Yep, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We'll move on with the opposition, and we're moving to Professor Dr. Allard van Riel, who is Professor in Service Innovation at Maastricht University. Floor goes to Professor van Riel.
Thank you, Prorector. Dear candidate, first of all, of course, my congratulations to you and your supervisory team for a very readable dissertation. I very much enjoyed reading it, not in the least because it evokes more questions than answers. I think I like that in a dissertation. I had questions about Chapter 2, but we have already heard a lot about Chapter 2, so I'm starting with a question about Chapter 3. My question actually refers to the term short in the transportation scale short videos. You developed that in study 3, and in the discussion of that study you basically discussed the issue that the TSSV scale does not predict total box office sales for movies. It's not able to correctly predict those total box office sales. Whereas it does predict the opening weekend sales. Well, that makes sense. And your explanation of why it makes sense is also understandable. The attractiveness of the trailer will probably more directly affect the attractiveness of viewing the opening weekend, the movie during the opening weekend, whereas other factors such as reviews and word of mouth may affect follow-up viewing. However, then you continue to say that to predict total box office sales, the evaluation of the full video could be used. Again, that could make sense, although it does not take into account the reviews, word of mouth, and the other factors, such as the weather, for example, during the first weeks of showing the movie, as is often the case in time series modeling. My question is if and to what extent your TSSV scale could really be used to evaluate full movies of approximately 90 minutes, or what would need to be changed in the scale to make it suitable to evaluate these full movies, and what would be its limitations. In other words, what does short in your TSSV scale mean and imply, and how would you overcome this short limitation?
Yeah, well, highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. So that's something that we're also actively discussing with this paper at the moment. So we're revising it to submit it somewhere. And indeed, so the question is, well, what is the scope of the scale, or what is the length of the optimal length where it would be most applicable? So indeed, we do call it the short video transportation skill. So I put it in the limitations as well, that it's mostly applicable to videos from a few seconds up into the movie trailers that we tested were 2.5 minutes. So up from a few seconds to a couple minutes, and beyond that, we didn't apply the scale. So again, I wouldn't be able to give you kind of an answer that's based on the data that we collected. But we're still thinking about whether we want to do that as well as part of the project. But I think it would definitely be interesting to test. I would think so, though, that there's again a question about to what extent it can be generalized to that. So if you're comparing it to 30-second commercials to like a 90-minute full-length movie, then you could argue that there are different factors as well. So I think one of these aspects that we included in the past that didn't end up in the final scale were these temporal parts. So that about what Jos also, Professor Lemming also discussed. So these things about variation over time, or the peaks and the pacing and so on. So about this longer time period. So I think those would be probably more relevant in full-length movies than in these short-form videos.
May I follow up on that question? Because I think the trailers are meant to be persuasive, whereas the movies are not necessarily meant to be persuasive. Does it have anything to do with that, maybe?
Yeah, that's also an important point. So all the videos that we included were meant in some way to be persuasive, so they're not necessarily meant for entertainment purposes only. They're using entertainment as kind of a means to an end, so to say. But I mean, it's an open question, but I think the scale would be to some extent applicable to, if you want to understand TV shows or movies. But that would come with a disclaimer that the scale is not necessarily developed for that context.
You could add maybe some elements to it, apart from the 5 factors, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. So that would be interesting for future research. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a very short follow-up question on chapter 2, and that is basically, I had the feeling when I read your motto, keep it short and simple. There are probably some boundary conditions that limit the applicability of your short and simple. Did you think about that in terms of culture, or maybe also the type of videos that you used to do your analysis on? Because that's a very specific type of video with very high, I would say, involvement of people. These are things that people care about in general. Do you think that is related to your finding that short and simple is the best way to present these videos?
Yeah, of course. So I mean, it's again the context that we're showing these videos in. So they're kind of also meant for persuasive messages. I think where we want to get a clear message across in a limited amount of time, and then I think it's generally a good strategy to keep it very short and simple. That people, I wouldn't think necessarily that people are very highly involved in this context, that they're willing to process a very long and complicated message. But I think we did investigate also these boundary conditions and moderators. So one of these general boundary conditions is that we have this law of diminishing returns, So you can keep making the scenes shorter and shorter, but up to a certain limit it becomes biologically impossible to process a scene that's like...
Please keep going.
Yeah, so that at some point there's kind of a limit to that. And then we did also look at the different the different campaigns that we had in the data set, so if there's any differences in terms of the effects during the revision that we're doing at the moment. But then we didn't find that there's a moderator, but that could also be because we didn't collect data on other types of conversions. Yeah, so the data set might not show that effect, even though it could be there. Yeah.
Future research.
Future research.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Lara Loopschaat, who is an assistant professor of marketing at this university. The floor goes to Dr. Loopschaat.
Thank you very much. Dear candidate, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to read your thesis. I find it very interesting, and interestingly you call it visual, or it's the dynamics of visual storytelling. And I very much like that also within your thesis you really emphasized visual storytelling over, let's say, simple tables, because you used a lot of graphs to get your points across. So I very much enjoyed that. As you also can imagine, given my own research, I was especially intrigued by chapter number 2, and my question will also address this chapter. So let me start a little bit with the question. You might feel that it's pretty general, but I was wondering why you actually picked visual complexity as your main factor driving attention. And why do I say that? So on the one hand side, you make it a point within your thesis that there's a difference, of course, between static still images and let's say static ads and video ads. Nevertheless, if you look a little bit more into online advertising per se, you find that, of course, also there's not this clear distinction anymore, but there's kind of a continuum. So we have animation in ads, and so forth and so forth. So there's a lot of factors which have also been found to drive attention in the online sphere, also with ads which have more dynamics in them than just simple static ads being shown. So my first question would be, why did you pick visual complexity, and also what other factors you would consider or you might have considered in your research? And the other question pertains to the result you find. So you do show, or you do kind of proclaim that the short and simple ads should be presented to consumers. Nevertheless, yet again, we're in an online environment and we're looking at online ads. So most of the time, also with video ads, there's not only one ad being shown, but there's sometimes 2 or 3 ads being showed in a row. So how does this competitive environment impact your claim that it's always necessary, or that it's particular to have short and simple ads if they also have to stand out relative to the other ads which have been shown? And how would you take that into account in a future study?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. So that's indeed, so that's another aspect where we focused on videos kind of in isolation. There's indeed also this context with banner advertising that in our studies we didn't necessarily study in that context. So we studied usually showing people an advertisement by itself without any competition around it. So I think, yeah, you're correct, right? So in reality, there's also competition going on. So that you could argue that for these banner ads, you need to be sufficiently vivid or complex to attract attention. But that's not something that we collected the data on. But I would speculate as well that probably be more in line with the study from Willemijn and Gijs Overgoor as well, that the data would probably show that there's optimum at a higher level of complexity for that particular type of content. So, but I think that context would be quite different than what we study. And then for your other question, so the question about why we picked visual complexity as an independent variable. So we picked that based on the on the literature. So I think what we focused on was the composition of the images. So what's in the image and how is it placed in there, and then also the montage, so multiple scenes together. So those are what we argue. Those are kind of the two fundamental elements of creating videos. And that's why we focused on that specifically. But yeah, there are many other possible factors that are interesting to investigate that we didn't include. But at some point we made a decision about the ones that we found most important or most interesting.
Can I maybe
Yes, please go ahead.
a short follow-up question on that? Because if you say that this is the most important one, and you, for example, look at something like ad liking as one of your dependent variables, and we know from advertising literature that ad liking is, of course, not enough, because especially in video ads, what we see a lot is that people might actually like an ad, but it's still about, if you have an advertisement, it's still about getting a certain message across and also linking that message to the advertising brand. And we see that a lot of, especially for viral content, that sometimes actually has gone wrong, with a lot of people liking the virtual content they're presented with, but they cannot link it to a brand anymore because the brand might be hidden somewhere, or it might actually not get the attention of viewers. So in that light, do you think that there might be factors you might actually have to include, especially if you want to give implications or give recommendations to advertising firms?
Yeah, so again, I think that's an important point. So indeed, so the difference between liking or being engaged with an advertisement does not necessarily mean that it's also effective in terms of commercial outcomes. So we also have in the Dutch case, the purple crocodile from Ora, I believe. Most Dutch people remember the purple crocodile, but no one remembers what the brand was. So I always use that example for that. But yeah, so that's an important aspect. So I think what we should add then is also the outcome. So we have general recognition of the advertisement, but you also want to have memory measures that they actually remember the important information. So they could remember the purple crocodile, but not the brand. And then people do remember the advertisement, but not the part that you find important. So I think to improve the study, we would change the memory measure, that they remember also the brand, for example, as an outcome, and maybe also the liking of the brand rather than the liking of the ad. But there's always a question if winning a gouden lookie, for example, if that's then predictive of the effectiveness of the ad. So there's also a lot of literature on it. Coming back to your earlier question, if there's time, so I forgot about an answer that I wanted to give. But to deal with the effect of competition, I think it would be interesting also to add a study there that you present these videos in an environment where you can also see other elements. So, for example, on a YouTube page where you have competing thumbnails, for example, versus or comments. Compared to the advertisement, and then you could also include this element of competition, which I think is very important. It's a limitation of the design that we used, that we didn't include that as a competition element in the environment there.
Okay, thank you. This concludes our first round, and we're getting close to the hour that may pass within a few minutes. Nonetheless, given the fact that we're entering a second round, I'm going to give the floor to Professor Dr. Willemijn van Dolen because she comes from further away and you always get the floor first here.
I do it very quickly because I see someone's coming in.
It's the prorector who decides that you get the floor.
It's, I would like you to reflect shortly, briefly, about the ethical implications of your work. So what do you think? Should there be guidelines? Because your findings could be used for the good and for the bad. And I'm a little bit concerned about the ethical implications. Could you briefly reflect on that?
Yeah, I think very briefly, but I think the way to see it is that it's kind of a hammer, so you could use it to bash someone's head in, but you can also use it to do good things. So
Hora est.
You can nonetheless briefly conclude your response.
Yeah, so I mean that's an important question, of course, and that's something that the difficulty is that we can't really collect data and give using the scientific method to provide an answer on the ethical questions that we have. But I do think that that's like an individual responsibility that everyone has, that if you know how to influence people or how to use that, that you use that, that you don't abuse those skills for the wrong reasons.
As a marketeer or advertiser, you mean?
Well, I don't think that advertising or marketing is necessarily unethical within certain boundary conditions, but it can also be used for other types of applications that are in the news at the moment. So that I think, but that's something that as an academic we have a limited, or with our kind of our data-driven understanding of the world, we can't really collect data to give a normative answer about what is right or wrong, but more descriptive about how the mechanisms of these things work and why particular things work, or what people could do to counteract them in terms of what works and what doesn't. But I don't think we can necessarily say what people should do in that case.
Yep, thank you. Sammy Wals, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed, and the degree committee will now discuss the quality of your thesis and the quality of your defense. And I request that you and your company leave this room so that we can deliberate. And after this deliberation, the beadle will come and collect you wherever you are in the building to return to this room.
Okay.
Sammy? This way, please.
Both.
In the dissertation,
Sammy Wals, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and the quality of your defense. And in view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account, I'm kind of repeating myself, but it's just to make sure that the message comes through. We've decided to grant you the degree of doctor. And Professor Wetsels is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. And I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Please all rise.
Nou, ik zal het maar in het Nederlands doen, denk ik. Er zijn hier veel mensen die Nederlands spreken. Sammy, belooft u dat u altijd volgens de beginselen van de wetenschappelijke integriteit te werk zult gaan, eerlijk en zorgvuldig, transparant, onafhankelijk en verantwoordelijk?
Dat beloof ik.
Krachtens de bevoegdheid ons door de wet toegekend, volgens het besluit van de commissie hier tegenwoordig verklaar ik u hierbij Sammy Floyd Wals tot dokter te bevorderen en u alle rechten te verlenen die daaraan volgens wet en gewoonte verbonden zijn. Ten bewijze hiervan overhandig ik u nu de bul door rector, secretaris en overige leden van de promotiecommissie ondertekend en met het grootzegel van de universiteit bevestigd.
Een stukje naar voren. Please be seated.
Ik zal ook nog een aantal dingen erbij vertellen. Ik heb het maar op Nederlands gedaan. Ik dacht er zijn een aantal mensen bij die ook Nederlands spreken. Dus dat wordt het Engels een beetje achterwege laten. Beste Sammy, familie, vrienden, collega's, leden van de commissie. Allereerst natuurlijk van harte gefeliciteerd, dokter Wals. Met name in Duitsland heeft het nog altijd een hoge waarde om dokter te zijn. Dat kan ik persoonlijk bevestigen, want ik woon in Duitsland. Een bijzondere mijlpaal, maar wees gerust, dit is geen eindstation. Maar juist het begin van een nieuw hoofdstuk, een nieuwe reis door tijd en ruimte. Waarom die nadruk op tijd en ruimte? Vanwege ook mijn eigen persoonlijke narrative die samenhangt met name met Star Trek. Niet iedereen weet dat, maar een aantal mensen wel. Ik ben een behoorlijke Star Trek fan. En jouw dissertatie is niet alleen een waardevolle bijdrage aan de literatuur over visual narratives, maar weerspiegelt ook de geest van verkenning en ontdekking die we uit het Star Trek-universum kennen. Kapiteins zoals Kirk, Picard en Janeway ontdekken, verkennen nieuwe werelden. En ook jij hebt je moedig en nieuwsgierig bewogen door de rijke en complexe landschap van visual narratives. Altijd op zoek naar nieuwe inzichten en nieuwe vormen van betekenis. Ik herinner me onze eerste ontmoeting nog goed, een echte first contact in Star Trek termen, tijdens het sollicitatiegesprek voor je IO-positie. Toen was ik onder de indruk van jouw kennis van zaken en ook de vertrouwdheid met uiteenlopende onderzoeksmethoden en theorieën. Zoals elke Star Trek missie begint ook deze met een duidelijke opdracht. Ook jouw promotietraject had een heldere missie en ook scherp geformuleerde onderzoeksvragen, zoals we in de presentatie ook terugzagen. In een tijd waarin we dagelijks overspoeld worden met duizenden visuele stimuli, laat jij overtuigend zien dat achter elk sterk beeld een verhaal schuilgaat. Dat begrepen wil worden door de audience. Die dissertatie stelt fundamentele vragen. Waarom raakt het ene beeld ons diep, terwijl het andere beeld ons koud laat? Hoe kunnen we meeslepende verhalen vertellen die de kijker vasthouden? En hoe openen we de deur naar nieuwe vertelvormen voor interactieve platformen? Zoals een kapitein niet zonder een sterrenkaart kan, heb je in het bestaande theoretische landschap zorgvuldig gekarteerd in hoofdstuk 1 van je proefschrift. Geen discipline bleef onbenut in jouw zoektocht. Een ware odyssee. Je maakt gebruik van diverse raamwerken en benaderingen om je missie te volbrengen. De uitkomsten van je promotieonderzoek zijn niet alleen relevant voor marketeers, zoals we ook begrepen, maar ook voor verhalenvertellers wereldwijd en natuurlijk ook de schrijvers van toekomstige Star Trek afleveringen. Een mooi parallel met je onderzoek mag niet ongenoemd blijven. Ook Dominic refereerde aan de XRM-conference. In Star Trek is er namelijk een behoorlijke innovatie. Dat is het holodeck, wat eigenlijk een gigantische XR-ruimte is, waarin ervaringen tot leven komen. Het is eigenlijk een soort summum van narratives. Jouw promotieonderzoek brengt dus een stap dichterbij tot deze innovatie, die natuurlijk niet alleen technisch is, maar we moeten ook begrijpen vanuit een sociaal en psychologisch oogpunt waarom individuen gebruik maken van dit soort technologieën. Hoe deze technologieën op een waardevolle wijze tot acceptatie van nieuwe vertelvormen kunnen leiden. Geen enkel Starfleet-schip vaart wel zonder loyale officieren. Graag wil ik ook Tim en Ines bedanken, die helaas niet bij kon zijn, voor hun betrokkenheid bij deze reis. Of om in Star Trek termen te spreken, je hebt nu de Starfleet Academy afgerond. Nu is het tijd om je eigen schip te bemannen, koers te zetten naar onbekende gebieden en je eigen verhaal verder te schrijven. Nogmaals van harte gefeliciteerd. Mogen deze reis net zo inspirerend zijn als de verhalen die je in je dissertatie onderzocht heeft. Om met de woorden van Mr. Spock af te sluiten, live long and prosper.
Then I briefly follow up in English with a laudatio. Dear Sammy, dear colleagues, friends and family of Sammy, today we're gathered to not only witness the successful defense of your dissertation, but also to mark the grand finale of what we call an epic journey. So allow me to honor this moment by retelling the tale of your PhD, an intellectual hero's journey in 5 acts following Freitag's pyramid. Act 1, Exposition. Our story begins with a bright young graduate in cognitive neuroscience just emerging from the master thesis, a thesis that now, in a much more developed form, is under review in the prestigious Journal of the Academy of Marketing Science. A small detail you're perhaps too humble to mention when you say it is at a journal. The inciting incident, a call to adventure in the form of a multidisciplinary PhD project, an open quest with 100 eager applicants. Yet it was you, Sammy, who was chosen, not because you had all the answers, but because you asked the right questions. You stepped into a team of supervisors with wildly different disciplines, personalities, and opinions. Some might say an ensemble cast worthy of its own sitcom. Rising action, Act 2. As in every great tale, the journey got harder before it got easier. You met the classic foes of the first PhD year, dense literature reviews, late nights reconciling supervisors' suggestions, and the infamous first teaching experience. And you managed all of this amidst a global pandemic. I think neither Martin nor I will forget your trademark response to some of this chaos. Okay, so what should I do now? The question always asked with clarity, patience, and a slight undertone of exasperation, and we as your supervisors often answered with riddles or even worse, silence, and still you always figured it out. Act 3, Climax. Then came the crescendo, the final year, all cylinders fired. Great. Studies submitted to top journals, collaboration forged with leaders in the field. Tom from Sydney, an authority in narratology, Drew from Boston, an authority in all things marketing. And of course, your journey took you across borders, not just metaphorically, but literally. A trip to Boston, and now the new beginning of a chapter with a postdoc in Aachen under Daniel's mentorship. Act 4, Falling Action. No tale is complete without its introspective turn. The final stretch of your PhD was not about collecting data, or not only about collecting data or publishing papers, but about crafting your narrative. And like many great storytellers, you discovered telling your own story is perhaps the hardest tale to write. Yet you did it with a stoic focus that defines who you are. You brought coherence to complexity. You didn't just finish your PhD, you authored it. Act 5, Resolution. Here we are today. The curtain falls on this particular chapter, but we all know the best stories end with beginnings. You've proven that moving stories is not just a thesis title, it's a philosophy, a method, a gift. You've shown us that research can move us and that science in itself is a form of narrative. Thank you for letting us be part of your epos. It was never a tragedy, it is a triumph. We now close this book, but only to open the next one. Congratulations, Dr. Wals.
Dear Dr. Wals, also on behalf of Maastricht University, I congratulate you, your family and friends with the degree you have acquired, and I would like to thank the members of the degree committee for their presence here and for their contribution to your doctorate. I'm closing this session formally. Informally, we will take a picture with Dominique Maar on the background, so we'll move all in that direction. Again, we will stand with our backs against the audience.
They can leave already.
But the beadle will
I will show you.
lead you out and bring you to the main
Yes.
facilities.
Thank you.
Whom is the photographer? Whom is the photographer?
Wie maakt de foto?
Sammy's mother. I think you have to call her back.
Zo, Dr. Wals, kom maar naar voren.
Wie is de fotograaf?
Ik kan naar
Papa,
Wie is de fotograaf?
mama of papa, wie wil jullie foto's?
Papa nog was geweest.
Ja.